One night, while breaking into a house to steal, a thief named Dialan stumbled across something completely unexpected. Inside the house was an old man chained up like a prisoner, but instead of begging for help or calling the police, the old man calmly asked Dialan to unchain him. He even promised to pay him for the favor. The old man turned out to be suffering from Alzheimer's. After looking around and realizing there was nothing valuable worth stealing, Dialan decided to help him anyway. But because of the ATM withdrawal limit, the old man could only give him 25,000 rupees at the time. As they headed to the nearest ATM, Dialan worried the old man might forget his PIN. Surprisingly, the old man claimed that simply seeing an ATM would help him remember everything. While the old man was busy counting his cash, Dialan secretly glanced at the account balance and nearly lost his mind. There was more than 2.5 million rupees sitting in the account. The moment he saw that number, greed completely took over. Dialan had just gotten out of prison and desperately needed money. In his mind, this old man was no longer just a helpless stranger. He was a walking jackpot. This is Marison.
அந்த மாதிரி மகாநடிப்பெல்லாம் எனக்கு வராது.
The old man explained that he was trying to get to New Delhi and only needed a ride to the bus station. Dialan immediately offered to drive him there himself. On the surface, he looked helpful, but the truth was simple. If the old man got on that bus alone, Dialan would lose his chance at the money forever. Surprisingly, the old man trusted him without hesitation and agreed to travel together. As the journey continued, Dialan tried finding ways to get closer to the bank account. At one point, the old man suddenly had another Alzheimer's episode and mistook Dialan for his own son. In that confused state, he handed over the bank card and revealed the PIN. Dialan could barely contain his excitement. He rushed to the ATM and entered the numbers, convinced he had finally hit the jackpot, but the machine instantly rejected the PIN. One more wrong attempt would permanently lock the card, so Dialan had no choice but to stop. Still, something about the situation felt strange to him. Somehow, the old man always seemed to lose his memory at the exact moment things became important. From then on, Dialan became even more careful. To keep the old man under control, he made him write down important details in a notebook, including family contacts, addresses, and personal information in case he forgot again. The old man happily agreed to everything except one thing. Whenever the conversation turned to the bank card PIN, he always found a clever way to avoid answering. For someone who constantly forgot everything else, the old man was surprisingly good at protecting his money, and things only became stranger from there. Sometimes the old man would suddenly claim he needed medicine for his memory loss. He would borrow a small amount of money from Dialan, then disappear onto a random bus heading in the opposite direction. If Dialan had not reacted quickly every single time, he would have lost both the old man and the fortune attached to him. During one of their bus rides, Pillai suddenly stared at Dialan with complete confusion, acting as if he had never seen him before. The other passengers immediately became suspicious, forcing Dialan to pull out the notebook filled with personal details, just to prove he was actually traveling with the old man. At that point, taking care of Pillai was starting to feel less like chasing easy money and more like babysitting a human time bomb. Later, while passing through a remote village, Dialan came up with another scheme. He deliberately crashed their motorcycle into a flock of sheep near the road. Just as he expected, the furious herders surrounded them and demanded compensation for the animals. Dialan immediately played the victim, pretending he was completely broke. Then he once again convinced Pillai to hand over his bank card, hoping the sight of an ATM would trigger his memory. To make it work, Dialan even pulled up a photo of an ATM on his phone, and surprisingly, it actually worked. For a brief moment, recognition returned to Pillai's face, and he finally revealed the PIN. This time the code worked perfectly, but the second Dialan checked the balance, his excitement completely collapsed. Instead of millions, the account only contained 8,000 rupees. The whole thing made no sense. As Dialan tried to figure out what was going on, he accidentally noticed something hidden inside Pillai's wallet. Tucked away in a secret compartment were several bank cards that looked exactly the same. That was when the truth finally hit him. The card Pillai had been handing over this entire time was never the card connected to the fortune. The old man had been carrying decoy cards all along. For someone pretending to constantly lose his memory, Pillai was incredibly careful when it came to protecting his money. That night, the two stopped at a small hotel in a quiet town. While Pillai was taking a shower, Dialan secretly called his old prison friend Chari, a well-connected criminal known as the Connector. Dialan laid out the entire plan. All he needed was a clear photo of the real bank card. Chari would use his contacts to clone copies, then they would secretly swap the cards without Pillai noticing. After that, they could slowly figure out the real PIN and drain the entire account. To Dialan, it sounded foolproof. After the call ended, Pillai had already prepared drinks and snacks for the night. As the alcohol started loosening him up, Dialan unexpectedly opened up about his past. He talked about growing up poor, living without a father, and spending his childhood struggling just to survive. Pillai quietly listened to everything without interrupting. By the end of the conversation, the old man simply raised his glass and reassured him that nothing would disturb him that night. Dylan barely thought about the strange comment. That night, he slept harder than ever before. In fact, he did not wake up until noon the next day. His body felt completely drained, like all his strength had disappeared overnight. Naturally, he assumed it was just exhaustion from traveling for days. The possibility that he had been drugged never even crossed his mind. During lunch at a roadside restaurant, Dylan pulled another one of his schemes. He intentionally tripped a waiter, sending hot soup spilling all over Pillai. While the old man went to the restroom to clean himself up, Dylan quickly grabbed the opportunity he had been waiting for. He snapped a photo of the real bank card and immediately sent it to Chari. At that moment, everything finally seemed to be going according to plan. Feeling victorious, Dylan happily continued the journey toward the village where Chari was staying. But halfway there, Pillai suddenly became agitated. Out of nowhere, he panicked and insisted they were heading in the wrong direction. At first, Dylan brushed it off as another memory lapse. But then Pillai desperately searched through his bag, acting terrified about losing 2.5 million rupees. That was when Dylan learned something shocking. The money in the bank account was only half of Pillai's fortune. The old man was supposedly traveling to New Delhi to collect another 2.5 million rupees in cash from his brother-in-law. In Dylan's mind, the numbers instantly doubled. What started as a 2.5 million rupee scam had suddenly turned into a chance to steal 5 million. Greed completely consumed him. Without hesitation, he pretended the wrong turn had simply been a mistake and immediately agreed to continue toward New Delhi. But after traveling all the way to a monastery where Pillai's brother-in-law was staying, Dylan received news that felt like a punch straight to the stomach. The so-called cash had already been transferred into Pillai's bank account a week earlier. There was no second fortune. It was the exact same 2.5 million rupees he had been chasing this entire time. At that point, Dylan felt completely played, like an animal being dragged around on a leash by an old man who supposedly could not even remember his own surroundings. Still, 2.5 million rupees was too much money to walk away from, so he decided to stay patient and keep waiting for the perfect chance. But during the trip, Dylan failed to notice one small detail that would soon change everything. Back at the hotel earlier, Chari had joked about getting involved with a police officer's daughter. He was so terrified afterward that he threw away his entire phone to avoid being tracked. Pillai casually asked why he did not simply throw away the SIM card instead. Chari then explained how every phone carries its own unique IMEI number, meaning the device itself could still be traced even after changing the SIM. For just a brief second, panic flashed across Pillai's face, but he quickly hid it. And from that moment onward, the story took a much darker turn. While a loud local festival filled Chari's village with music and celebration, Pillai quietly sat alone in his room crushing pills into powder. He carefully mixed the powder into 2 glasses of cola before Dylan and Chari returned. The 2 men drank everything without suspecting a thing. As the festival continued outside and the pair slowly drifted into a deep drug sleep, Pillai calmly opened his wallet and pulled out 1 SIM card from a large hidden collection. He inserted it into a phone and made a call. On the other end was a bald man who instantly turned pale the moment he heard Pillai's voice. And for the first time, it became clear that this old man was hiding something far more terrifying than simple Alzheimer's. At the very same time, the police were desperately trying to solve a terrifying series of murders. Within just a few days, 3 different victims had been killed. And despite having no obvious connection to one another, investigators discovered one chilling detail. Every single victim had received a phone call from the same number shortly before they died. The moment Pillai activated that SIM card again, the signal immediately appeared on the police tracking system. The dormant number had suddenly come back to life, and that was when the truth finally began to surface. Just like Dylan, everyone had been completely deceived. This quiet old man, suffering from Alzheimer's, was never a helpless victim. He was the one hunting people down all along. To understand everything, the story rewinds back to the beginning. When Dylan first broke into that mansion, Pillai appeared to be nothing more than a terrified old man chained inside the house. But only minutes earlier, he had already murdered the homeowner with his bare hands. That victim was the first person in the serial murder case. Even the puddle on the floor had been staged on purpose to make his Alzheimer's act more believable. Suddenly, every strange moment from the journey started making sense. The day Dylan mysteriously slept until noon was not exhaustion at all. Pillai had secretly drugged his drink the night before, then used Dylan's motorcycle to leave in the middle of the night and carry out another murder. Even the time Dialan noticed the motorcycle keys left hanging in the ignition was no accident. Pillai had rushed back after another killing and simply forgotten to remove them. Without realizing it, Dialan had become the perfect cover for a serial killer. A wandering thief traveling with a confused old man was the last thing anyone would ever suspect. Later that same evening, Pillai tracked down the bald teacher outside a high school. After a violent struggle, he tied the man to a flagpole and forced information out of him. That was when he finally learned the name of the last person on his revenge list, Vivek. Before the police could arrive, Pillai brutally finished the job and escaped the scene. On his way back, he remembered what Chari had explained about IME tracking. Realizing the phone itself could expose him, Pillai immediately threw the device into a river, wiping away every possible trace. And the next morning, he calmly staged another performance. He cut his own arm, pretended he had been robbed, acted confused again, and effortlessly fooled Dialan one more time. At this point, one question became impossible to ignore. Why was Pillai doing all of this? And who exactly was Meenakshi, the girl somehow connected to every murder? As the police continued investigating the murders, a horrifying truth slowly began to surface. Everything traced back to a teenage girl named Meenakshi. Years earlier, Meenakshi had been abused by her own homeroom teacher. The bald man Pillai eventually hunted down. But the abuse did not stop there. The teacher secretly recorded everything and used the footage to blackmail her. Things became even worse when she was forced to lure her own best friend into the same nightmare. That friend was eventually trafficked overseas. Buried under overwhelming guilt and trauma, Meenakshi could no longer endure the pain. Before losing her life, she left behind a final note containing the names of every man responsible for destroying her life. That was where Pillai entered the story. His wife had worked as a child psychologist, and Meenakshi was one of the children she desperately tried to help. Determined to expose the men behind the abuse network, she spent years collecting evidence and preparing to testify in court. But tragedy struck at the worst possible moment. Right before the trial, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. By the time she took the witness stand, her condition had deteriorated so badly that she could barely remember her own identity, let alone recognize the criminal standing in front of her. Without her testimony, the entire case collapsed. Every single perpetrator walked free. For Pillai's wife, the disease became a living nightmare. Some days she could still remember pieces of her life, while other days everything disappeared completely. She forgot her husband. She forgot herself. But even as her memories faded away, one thing remained painfully clear in her mind: the suffering of those children. In her final moments, she mistook Pillai for a police officer and handed him all the evidence she had gathered. With the last fragments of clarity she had left, she entrusted him with the truth. And from that moment on, Pillai devoted the rest of his life to revenge. Back in the present, Dialan still had no idea about the real reason behind Pillai's actions, but his suspicions were growing stronger by the day. One day, he secretly discovered a hidden collection of SIM cards inside Pillai's wallet, along with a video showing himself being drugged while he slept. That discovery completely changed everything. Determined to uncover the truth, Dialan pretended to drink another suspicious beverage, then secretly forced himself to vomit the moment he stepped outside. Later, while Pillai was taking a shower, Dialan searched through his phone. What he found instantly filled him with disgust. Pillai had been messaging someone named Vivek while pretending to be a wealthy businessman from Dubai. To Dialan, there was only one possible explanation. He became convinced that Pillai was secretly part of a child trafficking operation. Suddenly, the old man he had traveled with for days no longer looked like a victim or a grieving husband. In Dialan's eyes, Pillai was now something far more horrifying. Dialan was a thief and a criminal, but even he had limits he refused to cross. Enraged by what he believed he had uncovered, he told Chari everything. Together, the two decided they would lure Pillai to Chari's farmhouse, force the real bank pin out of him, and personally punish him for his crimes. So Dialan came up with an excuse and convinced Pillai to go with them. But during the drive, Pillai suddenly noticed something hanging from the rearview mirror. It was a small doll pendant. The moment he saw it, his expression froze. That pendant was identical to the online profile picture used by the final person on his revenge list. And in that instant, Pillai realized the terrifying truth. Chari was actually Vivek. The truth was even darker than Pillai realized. The night before, Vivek had never planned to meet him face to face. He had been hiding nearby the entire time, secretly watching the man who had been tracking down everyone connected to Meenakshi's tragedy. And the moment he recognized Pillai, he understood exactly why the old man had come looking for him. As the car slowly entered the farmhouse, the atmosphere instantly turned deadly. This was no longer about money, deception, or survival. This was the end of the road. The moment they arrived, violence exploded inside the farmhouse. Pillai was brutally beaten and quickly overpowered. Vivek tied him up and prepared to finish him off once and for all. Then Dialan arrived. Vivek calmly handed him a club, expecting him to help complete the murder. After everything Dialan believed about Pillai, it should have been an easy decision. But instead, Dialan shocked everyone. He untied Pillai and set him free. Earlier, before Dialan stepped out of the car, Pillai had secretly called him and allowed him to hear the entire conversation with Vivek. In that moment, Dialan finally learned the full truth about Meenakshi, the abuse, and the revenge that had consumed Pillai's life. Dialan was far from a good man. He was a thief, a criminal, and someone willing to scam an old man for millions of rupees. But even he could not stand beside monsters who destroyed innocent girls. The moment the truth came out, Vivek stopped being a prison friend in Dialan's eyes. He became something far worse, an unforgivable enemy. And just like that, two men who had spent the entire story manipulating and deceiving each other suddenly found themselves fighting on the same side. One was a desperate thief chasing money. The other was an old man consumed by revenge. But now both of them were standing against the same evil. A brutal fight broke out inside the farmhouse. But Vivek was ruthless and far more dangerous than either of them expected. Years of violence had turned him into someone terrifying. As Pillai struggled to survive, Vivek nearly choked the life out of him. At the last second, Dialan grabbed a sharp iron rod from the ground and drove it into Vivek with everything he had left. The fight was finally over. Outside, police sirens were already growing louder. Pillai looked down at Vivek's lifeless body, then at Dialan standing there with blood covering his hands. In that moment, Pillai understood something clearly. Dialan still had a future. He still had a mother waiting for him somewhere. His life should not end inside that farmhouse. But Pillai himself had already accepted his fate long ago. Ever since his wife died, he had been walking down a road that could only end one way. So just before the police stormed inside, Pillai took the weapon from Dialan's hands and accepted responsibility for everything. When the case finally reached court, Pillai confessed without hesitation. He never tried to justify his actions, and he never begged for sympathy. The truth remained buried between only two people. Later, Pillai asked Dialan whether he felt guilty for killing his former friend. Dialan simply shook his head, and for the first time in the entire story, there was a different look in his eyes. Not greed, not fear, but something closer to peace. By the end, the line between thief and avenger had completely disappeared. What remained was an unspoken bond between two broken men who, in the end, understood each other like father and son. So the moral of the story is never trust an old man with Alzheimer's who remembers bank scams better than your Wi-Fi password.